A war of words heats up between Tajikistan and the Taliban. Dushanbe embraces anti-Taliban forces as Kabul accuses its neighbour of meddling. Are the two heading towards conflict? And what implications does it have for the world? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami, Zeidan. Tension is rising between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. Russia is urging the two sides to resolve disputes after reports of an increased military buildup along the border. Last week, the Taliban warned the Tajik government against meddling in Afghanistan's internal affairs. It comes after Tajik President Emomali Rahmon refused to recognize the new Taliban government and accused the group of human rights abuses against the Tajik minority in the Panjshir Valley. Panjshir fell for the first time to the Taliban last month after fierce battles. So is a possible war looming along the Afghan-Tajik border? We'll discuss this in a moment, but first, this report from Hashim Ahlabarra in Kabul.
It all started in August when the Taliban were advancing towards the capital, Kabul, and taking over cities in the north. At that particular moment, top military commanders, politicians, leaders from the former government, US-trained pilots crossed the border into Tajikistan, seeking refuge. And then tensions started to build up. Now, for Tajikistan, Taliban is a threat to regional security, and this explains why Emomali Rahmon, the president of Tajikistan, has been very critical of the Taliban, accusing the Taliban of human rights violations in the Panjshir Valley in the north of Afghanistan. That's where you have a predominantly Tajik community based there. Those accusations were dismissed by the Taliban, and the Taliban on the other hand have been saying that Tajikistan is interfering into the affairs of Afghanistan. This has created some tension on the border with a military buildup from both sides, although the Taliban have been recently saying that the deployment of Taliban fighters into the border with Tajikistan is just for the sake of implementing security across the country and securing the border, and that this is something that has absolutely nothing to do with the tension with Tajikistan. But the Tajiks, on the other hand, are concerned. They believe that the Taliban are providing safe havens, weapons for the outlawed group of Jamaat Ansarullah, which is outlawed in Tajikistan, and helping them to cross into Tajikistan, something which has also been dismissed by the Taliban. We have to wait and see what happens in the next future. Hashim Ahlabarra, Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's take a closer look at the region's geography then. Tajikistan shares more than 1,400 kilometers of border with Afghanistan on the south. On the west, it borders Uzbekistan, and to the north, Kyrgyzstan. Meanwhile, China sits to the east. Tajikistan has emerged as a hub for anti-Taliban forces after the fall of Kabul. It's given protection to some of its leaders, including Amrullah Saleh, a former Afghan vice president who joined Ahmed Massoud and other Taliban opponents to form the National Resistance Front. Ahmed Massoud himself is the leader of the National Resistance Front. He's the son of Ahmed Shah Massoud, who fought against the Soviets in the 1980s and against the Taliban in the late 1990s. And there's Abdulatif Pedram, the leader of the National Congress Party of Afghanistan, also based in Tajikistan right now. Let's bring in our guests now. We have joining us from Kabul, Faiz Zaland, Professor of Political Science at Kabul University. In Paris, Parviz Mullojonov, Tajikistan political analyst. And in Moscow, Vladimir Sotnikov, International Affairs Specialist at the Russian Academy of Sciences. A warm welcome to you all. If I could start with Faiz in Kabul then. What do you think? Do you think tensions between the Taliban and Tajikistan are going to spill over into conflict?
Thanks for having me. No, I think there is a history of the conflict between Taliban and Tajikistan. In 1990s also, when Taliban defeated the Northern Alliance got asylum in Tajikistan. And once the US invasion started in 2001, the Northern Alliance, they come back from Kulab area of Tajikistan and invaded the Taliban strongholds in the north of Afghanistan. That blunt history of opposition. And then recently, once Taliban defeated their opposition, specifically the Northern Alliance resistance in Panjshir, they flown and got an asylum in Tajikistan and openly started a resistance within the Tajikistan. Now, to conceal those very interferences inside in Afghanistan from Tajikistan started a blame game by bringing the news with this Ansar al-Mujahideen and also insecurity on the border with Afghanistan. But more or less, I think the conflict will not spill over. It should be solved in coming days within the diplomatic
through diplomatic channels and means.
Specifically.
Right. It begs the question, though, maybe we can pose this question to Parviz in Paris. What is the strategic goal for Dushanbe? Why is Tajikistan hosting these anti-Taliban forces and elements? Is it simply about bolstering the power, the rights of ethnic Tajiks in Afghanistan? Or is it something wider than that?
The issue of ethnic solidarity is important for probably Tajik intelligentsia or for public opinion in general, but for the government of Tajikistan, the ethnic solidarity is not so important because, as you know, in big politics, this is not really an issue. The main reason of such steady position of Tajikistan is security concern, because Tajikistan doesn't believe the new government. The Tajikistani government doesn't believe that the Taliban government has changed. And we also know the entire information about what is going on in northern Afghanistan. We know the position of Ansarullah there. We know that there are about 1,000 fighters only from Tajikistan, which many of whom just recently came from Syria and Iraq. We know about several thousands of other fighters of international jihadists based in the northern Afghanistan, and we know how they esteemed and respected in the network, what the influence they have. And despite all promises of Taliban, they still kept in the network, and they have a good position. For instance, head of
Parviz, let me jump here and ask you: have we actually seen Afghanistan attacks being launched from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan into Tajikistan?
No, I don't believe that it would happen, but we cannot refuse completely this proposition.
But then it begs the question, forgive me for interrupting again, that why is Tajikistan so worried if we haven't seen that sort of security threat emerging to Tajikistan's borders from Afghanistan?
Because we have data and information from the ground that these groups are preparing for interfere and to trespass the border. So we cannot refuse this possibility. Mm-hmm. And the Taliban government, could not be trusted because Taliban permanently violate all their promises. You know, they promised a lot for Americans. They promised it during the negotiation process. They promised not to overtake the areas abandoned by the American forces. They violated it. They promised to organize an inclusive government. They violated this promise. They promised not to violate the rights of women and human rights. They violated this. They promised not to squeeze the rights of minorities. They violated this. They promised not to organize and not to conduct the forcible resettlement of people. We know that in Kazakhstan they violated this. And they know about the
skepticism
cases
is what you're saying in
of human rights in
Panjshir. Right. Let's see if we can bring in Vladimir then. From an international perspective, what is the consensus? Are foreign powers starting to see that Afghanistan is becoming a center for armed groups to launch attacks against neighboring countries or others beyond the region?
Well, actually, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this program, and good evening. I would like to say that, well, I don't want to say that, and I'm going to say that there will be no hot conflict actually, because okay, I agree with my Tajiki colleague from Paris that the Taliban government is a very tough government, and the regime of Taliban is violating all its promises. But actually, I think that Taliban regime doesn't want to have Russia angry. And because Tajikistan is a member of the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and if there will be a sort of aggression on the territory of Tajikistan, there will be a concerned and collective answer. Although I think that Russia won't be interfering into the conflict, and of course there will be no any way for bringing up Russian troops from territory of Tajikistan. Regarding international,
so then, given what you said, Vladimir, clearly there isn't a consensus, at least in Moscow, that right now Afghanistan represents a security threat to Russia or to any of the members of the Collective Security CSO organization.
Right. This is a really security threat. Yeah, I agree. This is a really security threat because actually, willingly or unwillingly, Taliban regime gives the possibility for fighters from ISIS and other terrorist groups to go southwards of the Russian borders and borders of CIS countries like Tajikistan. So this is really a security threat, and Russia actually agree with that. But
Taliban has been fighting at the same time ISIS, hasn't it? There's been conflict between the two.
Yes, it's fighting. But there are examples actually that if it's profitable for Taliban actually reached a tacit agreement with ISIS fighters and other terrorist groups. So Taliban, I agree that Taliban is not a regime as it was back in the 90s, but actually the crucial nature of Taliban hasn't changed at all. So really this is a threat, and internationally speaking, this is a threat not only for Russia and Tajikistan, this is a threat for all region and for eventually for the whole world.
But you said, just to clarify, Vladimir, you started off by saying you don't think that Russia will be sending troops, and you don't think that the Taliban want to engage any member of the CSO. So how are they
I'm sure Russia
perceived as a threat?
Won't bring in troops. Yeah. Only in case there will be, first of all, there should be a collective decision on the level of ministers, foreign ministers, and even on the level of heads of state of the CSTO to resolve this conflict, if the conflict starts, if the conflict would take place. So another thing that there is also the diplomatic maneuvering and the shuttle diplomacy launched by Russia in the face of special representative of the President of Russian Federation, Mr. Kabulov, who is flying back to Kabul, from Kabul to Islamabad and back, actually, to Moscow. So I think that eventually this very tense situation will be resolved diplomatically. But Russia, that will be the last resort for the countries like Russia to bring in troops against any possible hot conflict.
Okay, let's bring in Faiz again from Kabul. When you look at some of the leaders, Afghan leaders who are being based right now in Tajikistan, and you listen to what some of them say, like the National Congress Party leader, Abdulatif Pedram, he's talking about what he calls gradually liberating Afghanistan from Taliban rule. How realistic is that? How much power do these people really have, even in the Panjshir Valley?
I think it's very much important first to realize that how Ali Rahman or the government of Tajikistan is governing its population. Tajikistan itself in Central Asian countries, specifically neighboring Afghanistan, one of the very fragile state. It's governed by a dictator for past almost 4 decades. It's having internal conflicts politically, economically, and socially. It fears that soon there will be people within the Tajikistan raising their voice because there is no national consensus, no democratic opposition, and there is no one allowed in past 4 decades to raise their voice. Now, to spill over the conflict, the internal conflict to the region, they have started with opposition with Taliban and sheltering Taliban's opposition internally. What the specific resistance forces and their leadership can do, I think first, if they could do anything, if they could resist against Taliban, they would have kept geographical location inside Afghanistan. They would not be defeated. They would not have left Afghanistan by any means, because 20 years they received a lot of support from US, NATO. Politically, they were very much maneuvered through democratic mobilization of people having constituencies in North, specifically in Tajik. Third, they were very much linked into the Central Asian countries and some other regional powers, but they lost all those supports. They lost their constituency because they were incompetent to keep them. They were corrupt. They couldn't resist because they were not enough. They were not enough mobilized or enough motivated to resist Taliban inside, specifically in very mountainous terrain. Third, the region is getting changed. The region is much more supporting Taliban presence in Kabul than anybody else, because the region, the fear the region was having from spillovering of insecurity, narco trafficking, all those things are going to be controlled and somehow managed by Taliban, who promised the regional powers, specifically Moscow, China, and their diplomatic presence in Doha for past many years. It is not new for the special representatives of Moscow and China to communicate with Taliban such concerns.
Okay, so basically it sounds like Faiz is saying there's not a lot that the anti-Taliban forces can do. Let me take the question then to Parviz. Does Dushanbe really believe the anti-Taliban alliance can defeat the Taliban, can even retake the Panjshir Valley stronghold that it was kicked out of? Well, I mean, what is the end game for Dushanbe in its thinking? Just to have a card to poke the Taliban, or does it think these people can actually take back the country?
You know, first of all, it's very strange and very funny when Taliban people try to accuse the Tajik government in the Turkish by not supporting the Tajik government. This is a different story, but I mean, sorry, I mean, in Taliban government, the current Taliban government, 17 members of this government are in the UN sanctions and FBI wanting list. There are about seven of them belong to Haqqani network, which is accused in organizing a series of terrorist attacks in Kabul.
Okay, maybe Parviz, we could focus on the question of what Dushanbe thinks the anti-Taliban alliance can achieve.
Their neighbors in this section. But answering to your question, I would say that we are not talking about. So I personally don't believe that, for instance, Taliban forces would go in big numbers through the border. This is not feasible, first of all. But we believe that Taliban government in the future, and it's actually happening now, would give refuge to numerous terrorist organizations like Ansarullah and people related to Al-Qaeda, Caucasian terrorist groups, originally from different countries of Central Asia. So they already took refuge there. They are organizing their strongholds. And we believe that in the future, they will be able to use the strongholds to make pressure on the region. And probably in the future, if there would be sometimes destabilization in Central Asian countries.
So does Dushanbe think that by supporting people like Ahmed Massoud, Amrullah Saleh, that they will be able to prevent the sort of scenario you're talking about? Is that the thinking?
I think that the main purpose is to create a kind of counterbalance to radical groups in Afghanistan, to make the Taliban government to accept other groups within the government and to organize more balanced government, which would not threaten the region.
Okay, let me bring in Vladimir and ask this question. It seems the Tajik president has been pushing the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, to support the anti-Taliban alliance. You said earlier you don't think Russian troops are going to be going into Tajikistan or into any kind of conflict with the Taliban anytime soon. How likely is it that Russia might give some backing to these anti-Taliban elements in Tajikistan?
Actually, thank you very much for the question. This is a very good question you're asking. I think that, again, I'm just sure that Russia will try to use all diplomatic efforts, to convince Tajik President and to convince Taliban, because it has good contacts, actually, with both sides of this still silent conflict of words. So, and there will be a diplomatic, most probably, there will be a diplomatic solution to this crisis. But again, the peculiar situation is that Tajikistan is an active member of CSTO, and CSTO actually, as I said before, should decide collectively whether to react with some more stringent measures if there is an aggression against Tajikistan, or to undertake some other measures. Some other measures, I mean that to try to negotiate a peaceful settlement of this crisis, if this crisis would be hot, actually. But Russia actually has a unique role, it seems to me, that like a mediator, not like China, actually, and of course not like US or European Union, actually, because they are out of question for now. Russia has a unique position to offer diplomatic solutions to both sides, and to actually to Taliban and to other Central Asian countries. So this is right now in a unique position.
Right. All right, let me ask, I think we've got time for one more question. Faiz, how united is the front against the Taliban? There were reports of friction or reluctance between some people like Ahmed Massoud and Amrullah Saleh.
It's very true. They are not united. They were disunited in past 20 years inside Kabul. How can they be united that some of them stay in Dushanbe, some are in Tashkent, others are in Istanbul and Ankara, and some are in Delhi and Pakistan. They were divided 20 years when they were staying in Kabul, in Panjshir, Parwan, and Mazar-e-Sharif. Secondly, they have differences in approaching and communicating with Taliban also. We saw that people in the north, for example, Atta Mahmoud Noor and Dostam, they opened a front in Mazar-e-Sharif to confront Taliban's invasion, but then they got their back to Tashkent. And then Ismail Khan, who left to Iran now, he backed off from staying in Herat. But the very late resistance comes from Ahmed Massoud, while Amrullah Saleh, who was never backed by any Tajik or Panjshiris, he got asylum there, and then he was told that you are not part of the real resistance. So he left early
so clearly
than anybody else.
There's still divisions between them. All right, we're going to have to end it there. Let's thank our guests for their contributions, Faiz Zaland, Parviz Mullojonov, and Vladimir Sotnikov. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami, Zeidan, and the entire team here, for now, it's goodbye.